Welcome to the Hockey Writers Prospect Corner, a show with our top prospects writing crew, bringing you the latest news, analysis, scouting reports, mocks, rankings, and much more. From the World Juniors to the NHL Draft floor, from the farm to the NHL, our team covers everything that happens in the world of prospects. So sit back, grab a notebook, and get ready for Prospect Corner.
Hello, everybody, and welcome into another episode of Prospect Corner here at the Hockey Writers. I'm your host, Matthew Zator, and as always, joined in by prospect experts here at the Hockey Writers, Dayton Reimer and Peter Baracchini. Changed your name there, Dayton, for a second.
Yeah, I'm glad to, be a part of my first Prospect Corner here.
Yes, a new guy. Also got Mark Scheig joining us again just after the Scouting Combine. Welcome, Mark. Thanks for coming on again.
Of course, always a pleasure.
All right. Well, let's just jump right into this. I mean, we've got just wrapped up the Scouting Combine on the weekend, and both Peter and Mark were there, giving us plenty of coverage throughout. I know there's a few articles that have been written and put out by both of you guys already. So lots of stuff to talk about. So let's just start right there and talk about the Scouting Combine overall. And I'll start with you, Peter. What are your thoughts on it this year? Takeaways from it.
Yeah, always, it's always a great opportunity to go down, see the prospects of testing and all that. But I think the main thing was I've gone the past 2-3 times. Well, this was my third time. Mark, you've gone previously before. I don't know what it was like before the last 2 years or pre-pandemic, but I can honestly say there was a lot of great personality in terms of the prospects. Being very open, very, straightforward with the answers. They were very, even sarcastic at times too. And it started off with not necessarily sarcasm in the sense that, oh yeah, whatever, but they had a good laugh. They were talking about everything, from T.J. Gillen's response to what his animal would be to Macklin Celebrini just falling short under 6 feet. And, both Mark and I were there where he was just like, oh man, yeah, I fell so short about that. Just like a little, centimeter, like half of a centimeter off or something like that. But yeah, it was great to see them all smiles, laughs, having fun, soaking it all in. I think that was the most important thing about that. And in previous years too, a lot of the previous ones that I've been to, the prospects were, down to business, that working hard. They were very determined with their responses and everything like that. But I kind of feel those a little bit more laid back, and that's really what you want to see with all of them because it's going to be hectic. It's a busy time for them, and they're having fun with it. That's the most important thing.
For sure. I mean, they get together, and some of them may not have met each other before, and it's great to see them. Being loose and not as serious, even though it is a serious time, right? So, yeah, that's really good. Mark, what about you? What did you see throughout the time that you were there at the Scouting Combine this year?
I really just want to echo what Peter said. The personality, and I've been at this event since the McDavid draft year when they've had it. I don't think I've seen more personality out of a group of prospects than this year's, all the way across the board, just whether it be the respectful kind, whether it be the funny kind, just prospects for being themselves. It just felt like that they weren't coached as much or to sound cliche or to sound, just to be pleasing the media. Like they literally were doing everything that they could to show who they were in a good way. I mean, Lashunov was hilarious as well. He had us all howling. He was asked the question about the Blackhawks and going out to dinner, what was it like to go out to dinner with the Blackhawks? And he basically said, "It's food, you guys," and he literally had everybody just howling at that. Because, what do you expect him to say in that moment? But he comes up with that when you don't expect it. That's a breath of fresh air. So that was the big thing. I know we may talk about this later too, but some of the other storylines that have come out of this combine, there's a lot of very interesting storylines. If we weren't there, we wouldn't have grab the hold of some of the things. It's going to be very unusual what's going to happen, I think.
Yeah, I mean that, like I said before, that when we missed it that 1 year with or maybe even 2 years without the Scouting Combine because of COVID, and we missed a lot of that. And that it's great that it's back and better than ever here. And yeah, very good to have it back. Dayton, what about you? I mean, you weren't there, but there's a lot that came out on Twitter and throughout. I mean, what did you get from it?
Yeah, it was a lot to sort through for sure. And so some of the things that kind of stood out were Lev Shunov's responses. Those were like, it just showed how kind of laid back and casual he was, which when I compare to someone like Connor Bedard last year, who's always, very serious, very business, makes me wonder if he's ever thought about anything other than hockey. And I have been corrected. He's actually a very fun, laid back guy, but he does not show that, right? Whereas Levshunov definitely showed that. And I think that was, a real positive sign for his draft stock, right?
Mhm.
Um, the tight race between all the defensemen, I think, also stands out. Like Levshunov isn't necessarily guaranteed to be the first defenseman off the board. And a lot of prospects, you've got Zeev Buium, you've got Zane Parekh, you got Sam Dickinson. All those guys have made a really good push for being the first defenseman drafted, and I think they all have a legitimate claim to it now.
Mhm.
They've really showed well at the combine, answering all the questions really well and performing at the fitness testing. Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see for sure.
Mhm. Yeah, like I said, lots of players there, lots of tests, lots of stuff happening. So I'll go back to you, Mark. I mean, you mentioned Lev Shunov as being one of the standouts in the interviews, and was there anyone else that kind of stood out to you throughout, either be the fitness testing or in the interview process there?
I was really focused on a lot of the top guys when it comes to standouts. I mean, we'll talk a little bit more about EJ Emery and Cole Beaudoin and how much they really stood out on the fitness testing. The one guy that I think really was interesting to me was Berkeley Catton, only because when
Hmm.
in his measurement, he his weight ended up being he's bigger than some of his counterparts. I believe Logan Cooley's bigger than Logan Cooley at the same time. So all the doubt about drafting Catton, top 10, maybe even top 5 for someone looking for a center, I think he's in a position where he's earned the opportunity to get that, where I don't think size is really that much of a factor. There are a couple scouts that actually said they feel like that he can be a legit number one center,
Mhm.
despite maybe not having the ideal size that you're looking for.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know for I hate the undersized tag. I mean, it's just it should be an ancient thing now. I mean, there's so many players that just go above and beyond it, and it's never a problem. I mean, yes, being really small is always sometimes you can't go overcome it, but Berkeley Clan's not really that really small. I mean, was he 5'10"? I mean,
Yeah,
that's not
he measured over 5'10",
yeah.
actually closer to 5'11". So
It's not small in my mind. I mean I'm 5'11", so it's like and there's a lot of 5'11" players in the NHL. So it's like I don't know about the undersized thing being as
draft him
big
with
of a thing with
confidence.
him.
Draft Catton with confidence, though, for
Yeah,
sure.
I think
Yeah.
so. Yeah. All right, Peter, what about you? Anyone else that stood out throughout the day there?
Yeah, and I mean, I don't want to. I I want to save my bits for like interesting measurements for the next section when we get to it. But in terms of stand up players, I'm gonna say Cole Eiserman. He was very honest and straight forward with his answers about, talking to teams about the improvements that he needed to get to in terms of like, I mean, we've seen all the scouting reports and everything like that, the lack of physicality, the defensive engagement. And he knows that, there's work to be done. He knows that it's not just about, the goal scoring and everything like that. And I didn't have, I wasn't in like the media scrums and everything like that, but I did catch the end of him saying that, there he does need to put in the work. That is absolutely huge, especially for one of the guys that, just broke Cole Caulfield's, NTDP record. Great to have, but it's not the end all be all. He knows that it's like that's a great accolade to have, but now the real work begins. And I think he's very, very much up for the task in order to better himself and round out as a more versatile offensive player instead of just being, that one trick pony slash sniper, shooter, goal scorer, what have you. But I think he could really round out his game if he puts in the work. And I think he's good to do that.
Mhm. Yeah, I think he's a guy that's going to end up being more than just his shot. I mean,
Mhm.
and I think he's going to be drafted higher than everyone's thinking that he's going to drop. I don't know if he's going to drop as much as everyone's thinking now, but we'll see. Dayton, finishing off with you, who did you see stand out from the outside?
Yeah. Let me just check. Uh yeah, I mean, Lev Shunov's interview was really good. Um, there's a few other interesting measurements that I think we're going to get to here soon. Uh, but I will mention Stian Solberg. I thought his agility testing was
Yeah.
surprising. Like he's
Mhm.
apparently the most agile player they invited to the scouting combine, and I would not have
Those
expected that for somebody who is projected to be a defensive, hard-hitting defenseman. I think there's a hidden, maybe not so hidden, like upside to his game and a real quickness, a real lost for words here. Goodness. Yeah, no, I was just surprised by that. I think he's, could be much more than what he's projected to be,
Mhm.
given that he is, he's so quick on his feet.
Yeah, that surprised me too. And he's a guy that we've talked about being a guy that could potentially push his way into the first round, maybe. And maybe this is something that may have some other teams looking at him a bit more now after the combine. So we'll watch to see where he goes on draft day. All right, you guys alluded to it a couple times here. Let's get to some interesting measurements, and I'll start with you, Dayton, since you want to kind of talk about it. So, what did you see as some interesting numbers that came out of this?
Well, it was already kind of alluded before, but EJ Emery's fitness testing was not only like the best in several categories, but it was by far the best.
Mhm.
Um, I'll try to pull up some of the actual numbers here because they really stood out. Let's see. So his horizontal jump was 4 inches over the next guy. His body fat composition was tied with Sam Dickinson, which was over 3% more, or sorry, less than the next guy. And everyone else was really close. So like massive gap there. Where else was he? Like he showed up at the top of several lists by like a wide margin. And to
Hmm.
me, that really stands out as somebody who's just so fit and so like committed to being like a very complete athlete. Vertical jump was the last one that stood out. 3 inches more, almost 3 inches more than the next group. Just a really, really powerful player. And I think that might have some really good repercussions
Hmm.
for him in the draft.
Yeah, I mean, it's impressive to see some of these young kids being able to already figure that out, that you have to be fit, you have to be conditioned going in, because sometimes some players don't figure that out until they're way later, and sometimes never. Or they have to. I mean, to be able to have a long career, uh, coaching staffs, they're so big on it now. And I mean, sometimes they're really disappointed when players come into camp not fit, not conditioned after the offseason. So have some of these younger players already figuring that out. That's a big thing, at least in my mind. All right, Mark, what about you? Any interesting measurements that stood out?
Yeah, I'll give you four. They just kind of alluded to it here with Dickinson. Just under 6'3", already over 200 pounds. Even though he played in the Memorial Cup, he still did the testing. And just some of the things he said during the interview, just a desire to be the best. Like,
Mhm.
you can tell when guys have that little bit of an it factor to them. Dickinson definitely comes across as that, and already having the size at his age. And I think you guys are going to see a pattern about size here. Liam Greentree, I think, is going to be one of the best players in the OHL overall in the coming years. Coming off a huge season in Windsor, even though they didn't make the playoffs last year, He's just under 6'3", and he's already 215 pounds and 90 points scorer. So that's going to be somebody that's going to, I think, do really well and is going to go a little bit later. That is going to pay dividends for somebody. Tijjugunla is only 17 years old and he's already 6 foot and 191 pounds. He doesn't turn 18 until August 1st. That's just not fair. How much he can pack on. He actually could go in the top five. I mean, there's a lot of talk about teams that see him as a one center and just how much he can pack on. And I'll give you a name a little bit lower down the list, but his measurement I thought was very interesting because you don't see very many high school players at 6'4.5" and over 200 pounds already. But that's Javon Moore, and he's going to go to Minnesota. And I think with proper development, that's a guy that's going to go in the middle rounds, but could end up being, I don't want to call anybody a star like that yet, but some of the things I've heard about him and the way he measured here, it's an interesting name all of a sudden. And you're going to a school like that, if you're able to find a little bit of success and development, you can do a lot worse than 6'4.5" when you're still in high school.
I'll say, yeah, there's a lot of growth there still to come for him. So yeah, very good frame, and we'll have to keep an eye on him where he goes. And finishing off with you, Peter, who did you see, or what did you see as interesting measurements here?
Yeah, I think the biggest one for me was trying to find it here, try to remember what group he was in. It was Dean Latorno. Um,
He was early, yeah, that stood out too.
I'm trying
Yeah,
to
he's
use okay, so
930.
he's
Dean Latour is six six
yeah,
six six and a half and 214
214
pounds.
pounds. Yeah. That's absolutely insane. But also looking at the measurements, he has the lot or the biggest wingspan measuring 83.25 inches. So that is, I mean, he's already got the height of a basketball player right there, but also that wingspan too. Imagine if with the hands that he could pull off the moves on ice, that could just really fool a lot of players right then and there. Um, yeah, we talk about players that can push for the first round. He's continued to push that first round for me. I believe he's not going to the USHL. I believe he's making the jump straight to the NCAA because I mean, he did torch up the high school scene. Maybe this is what he needs to go. Maybe the USHL may not be not necessarily as competitive because you do need to take that step before you go to college. But for him to make that jump right away is very, um, surprising in a way. But if there's a player that could probably, like, um, adapt quickly to that college level, it'll definitely be him because he's already got that size and height advantage going for him. Yeah, I think that was the biggest one that stood out because he was already a big kid coming in, and he's, with that wingspan and with the height and weight, he's definitely going to be a monster on the ice.
Yeah, I mean 6'6", and yeah, that's gonna that's pretty big wingspan too. Like you mentioned, he's gonna be someone to definitely watch again. First round talent, and maybe later in the first, we'll see. All right, I'll stay with you, Peter. Favorite interview? I know we've mentioned Liv Shunov with his personality, but anyone else who kind of I know Andrew wrote an article on Jack Pridham. I you know who else did you see as a favorite interview that came out?
Yeah, also I didn't mention Jack Pridham too because he tested very well in terms of like the pull-ups, the agility testing as well. So shout out to him, but also his interview was very, very very, very to the point, but he was very like detailed with his answers, especially when we talked about making the jump instead of going to OHL route. He went BCHL in college kind of thing. Um, he prioritized education. He made that a point to say that that was important for him to go and have that career beyond hockey, to have that reassurance just in case. And that's very smart for a lot of players nowadays. Um, joked a little bit about, his dad being the assistant general manager of the Maple Leafs. Was he in the room? Was he giving him a hard time? Obviously, because he manages the cap, Jack said that, he wasn't part of that. But, it was great for him to see, like, to have a little bit of a laugh with that. Um, Sam Dickinson was a very, very, very great interview or a very great scrum because he was so again, very detailed with his answers, but straightforward, very respectful with his responses. But if I had to give the funniest one, it would be Stein Solberg because we found out that he only started playing defense when he was 14. And the story is that they were so basically the coach comes to him. He found out that one of the players peed in the tub and basically just told Stein that says, guess what? You're playing defense. And so he was playing forward at the time. So he just basically went there and it looks like it was probably the right move because he's very mobile, he's very physical, and he's very strong defending against the rush. So usually you see players make that jump from defense to forward or forward to defense, usually in the, triple A minor hockey level. Um, Still around that level, but it's still very, very, quick turnaround for him. Um, you know, for him to do that, that was absolutely very impressive. But the response there, we were all looking at one another. We just couldn't help but laugh because usually it's just like, oh, I wanted to try something different. No, it's because coach didn't like something the player did, and guess what? You're going to be in the as a defenseman now.
Yeah, it's funny how things work out sometimes, right? And maybe that's why he's so agile and because he went from forward to
Yeah.
defense, right?
Hmm.
Yeah, he's a very interesting name now that's caught maybe didn't have our attention before, but now a bit more in the last few months here. Mark, what about you? What's your favorite interview or going through that part?
Yeah, the two names that haven't really been brought up yet. Zane Perek is an awesome, awesome interview. Somebody who can be very funny. It's a great personality. Can be serious when he needs to be. But then he was the one that alerted us to he was asked what his Uber rating was and what his snap score was. The thing that went completely viral in the hockey world about some of the weird questions, and he had a great exchange. What was your Uber rating? And he said it was a 4.92. And then the follow up was, well, why is it not a 5? And he just laughed and like, that's a great question. He didn't even know, but he completely played along with it. So just the personality on display with him, he's going to be a stud. And the other guy too, that I'm glad to see that he was a really good interview. I think very well beyond his years. Aaron Kiviharju is a really fantastic interview.
Mhm.
You if you pull it up, you'll see what I mean. I think him and Hellenius, I think, did something together where they just kind of clicked together. So those two were by far, I think, the best interviews of the combine in my mind.
Yeah, I really like that Zane for X one. The Uber rating. Sometimes these questions like why? I guess with the Uber rating because you can see what type of character and that
Yeah,
type.
you're a
Right?
guest in
Hmm.
someone's car,
Yeah,
and that's an interesting way of finding out, well, how are you on the outside?
yeah, for sure. I mean, and it's interesting some of the questions that get asked, and there's always a point to it, to see what it's usually to gauge character, right? So,
I think there was
all
a
right,
prospect that was asked what the color blue was.
yeah.
What a question that is.
Right.
How are you supposed to answer that?
Dayton, what about you? Did you see anything? I know a lot of the interviews were put out on, on social media and stuff like that. Any ones that stood out to you?
Yeah, I wasn't able to catch a lot of the full interviews. The ones that I did see, Lev Shunov really stuck out. I've mentioned that before, and I don't know if I need to mention any more about it. I'll keep her short and sweet. I think Lev Shunov had a fantastic interview, and it made me really like him as a potential second overall.
Mhm. All right. I'll stay with you, Dayton. Any players that you're now looking at more closely now after the combine? I mean, someone that maybe stood out that you weren't following as closely. I mean, some players like we already talked about Solberg. Anyone else that kind of you're now looking at more?
I mean, both of them have been mentioned in Solberg and Letourneau. I think those guys are fringe first round picks who may have pushed themselves into that conversation based on a strong combine. Baudouin, I think also Cole Baudouin has done really well in his fitness testing and his strength. Um, he might be able to, solidify that first round pick based on, how he did. I don't think he was guaranteed to be one before that. Uh, some say yes, some say no. And those three guys, I'll definitely be watching a little bit more closely because I think they had really strong showings that maybe weren't exactly expected.
Mhm. Peter, what about you? Anyone that you're looking at more now that the testing and all this stuff has been completed?
Yeah, just to echo Dayton's comment about Cole Baudouin, I think this is a guy that was kind of fringe first rounder, but there's going to be a lot of talk about like a lot of like bigger guys possibly getting drafted earlier because they have that size factor. Um, he's definitely going to be one of those names that really can stand out because he's got that power forward game, not as quick, but this hockey sense, the strength and the skill is there, and teams would love to have that kind of pick later on in the first round. Um, yeah, I also kind of think too, going back to Cole Eiserman, we all know that he could be taken higher. He could fall out of the top 10 to 13, but when he said that he interviewed with the Toronto Maple Leafs, that was not necessarily very telling, but it does give you a glimpse that if he does fall further down, that he's going to be money for some organization. Like if he already falls outside to like 12, 13, that's probably like where you probably should not let him fall any further, especially if he does go to a playoff team, then that's just a big mistake on your part.
Mhm.
Obviously I do have the sense that maybe he can go, just inside the top 10 or just outside of that. But if he does fall to the Maple Leafs, I think that's still a bit of more of a pipe dream. But the fact that he was interviewing for a team that's lower than where he's expected to go, something to keep an eye on, that's for sure.
Mhm. I mean, that means that Toronto thinks maybe he'll be around there,
Mhm.
right? And that's yeah, you never know what happens in the draft. Guys move around, and then all of a sudden, there's guys available where there may not was expected before. Mark, finishing with you, what anyone that you're looking at more now that the combine's over?
Yeah, there's an obvious one, and then there's a little less obvious one. The fact that we're even having the thought about Becca Seneca being a possible top five pick,
Yeah.
maybe even within, has to be the big story here. Columbus had dinner with him, Utah had dinner with him, and you're talking the fourth and the sixth overall pick. You know that there was the growth spur. You know, he had the amazing end of the season before the injury. And it seems that teams are really believing in the production, the size, and we're talking possibly the next best winger after Demidov.
Mm.
So that's, especially from a Columbus perspective, we're going to pay very close attention to the progression there. The fact that he could be in that conversation for number four, maybe number six, somewhere in the top 10 now. And then the other guy that I'll throw out there, I think did really well for himself, that kind of in the next tier below some of the top names, but Teddy Stiga, I think, is going to be somebody who's going to be very
Yeah.
popular
Mhm.
with teams. And I'm definitely going to follow his progression now.
Yeah, I think we mentioned Stiga's name maybe last episode, this episode before. I know we've talked about him a
Mhm.
few times on the show lately. So yeah, there's another name to keep an eye on. So let's go to storylines coming out of the combine now, because I mentioned a few things, but Mark, any storylines that are now coming out of this that we're going to be looking at coming up to the draft?
Now, the top storyline going to Vegas now will be Demidov and Saleyev not being at the combine and how that's going to impact the top of the draft, because trying to figure out how the top 10 could go. I went into the combine thinking that you got two potential top five picks. Now I'm not convinced that either of them go in the top five because of some of the concerns, what some of the scouts, some of the teams think, concerned about Demidov's situation, maybe some of the other defensemen that teams had a closer look at. Maybe they go up a little bit on the list over Saleyev. I know we got the event coming up with Dan Milstein where they're going to be out and be able to be available to teams. But where they ultimately fall is going to be just a massive storyline. Who's going to end up taking them? Who's going to be comfortable taking them? And how it affects the top of the draft.
If Demidov falls out of the top 5, that's pretty big for teams that could potentially be getting like Montreal. I mean, that'd be big.
The trades too. A lot of first round picks. So this could be a wild draft in Las Vegas. The number of first round picks possibly available for trade.
Yeah,
move up or down. That'll be huge.
Yeah. Peter, any other storylines are that have come out of the combine here?
I mean, we talked about Levshunov, Saleyev. Mark, I know you mentioned this in your, kind of wrap up as well in your notebook, but the possibility of Z Buium going out west as well, to California, to the Anaheim Ducks. And we talk about how, not necessarily like how shocking it'll be if Seneca goes top 5, but Z Buium possibly going top 3 and being that next defenseman behind Artem Levshunov. If they do indeed pass on Demidov, I mean, because we already know how set the Anaheim Ducks are on defense, and if they could get another one that just basically won the championship and basically increased his stock since the World Juniors, that wouldn't be a bad decision as well. I think that could be something that you need to look at, and seeing how deep they are defensively, you could easily ship one or two defenders out to make room for him as a player that, you could sign to a contract. And if you know that 2 players that you have in your system aren't necessarily going to be earning a contract, might as well make that space, because he definitely has shown that he could probably be a top 5. And now we're even talking about top 3 picks. So interesting to see how Z Buium is going to play out.
And I'll just add one quick thing on the Anaheim, just the Gauthier and Jamie Drysdale trade. They traded a defense, and we know Zellweger is going to be the big story with Anaheim on D, but there's a spot now with Drysdale being out where you can get a 200-foot player like that.
Yeah.
Now, if you guys saw the Stanley Cup final, there were 4 guys there. It was Celebrini, it was Levshunov, it was Buium, and it was Caden Lindstrom. It would not shock me to see that be 1, 2, 3, 4.
3, 4.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Buium is one that I don't know if we've talked about him being in the top 5, and that'd be a pretty big thing for Anaheim. Maybe throwing another curveball like they did in the last by taking Carlson.
Never.
Right?
Never say never.
So we'll see. That's gonna be something to watch. Dayton, anything that you're kind of watching now coming out of the combine?
Yeah, I'm interested to see how high Iginla goes, because he's kind of been the talk of some of those, 5 to 10 range after some of those big names goes. But it's not impossible that he sneaks up into the top 5, as we've kind of mentioned. There's rumors that the Ottawa Senators might be looking very intently at Iginla, which would steal them away from the Calgary Flames, who are very much looking at Iginla if he's still there. Would there be kind of a race between some of those teams to try to move some of those picks to get that guy that they want? I think there could be almost an arms race for Iginla.
Yeah.
Because people have gotten really high on him. And I don't know if he sneaks ahead of Caden Lindstrom, but I don't know. He didn't have the injury that Lindstrom did.
Watch Montreal at 5. If Lindstrom goes to Columbus, watch Montreal at 5 for Iginla.
Yeah.
I'd also say this about Lindstrom. I was in his scrum. He said that he talked to teams. They were concerned about they did ask about it, but it does not seem like a factor or would come into, concern that could affect his, draft stock. So hopefully that's a good sign right there that he shouldn't fall as much as he should, because teams would be wary about that injury. And it was because it was a back one. Could understand why, but he kind of put that to rest.
That's the hope. Yeah, I did read that he was, working out very regularly during the week and should be at full health right now. I think there still might be a couple of teams who don't want to take that risk, even though it's a very, very small risk at this point. Because you never know, right? Sometimes you have a Josh Norris who seems like he's okay, and then all of a sudden has no shoulder.
Yeah. Lots of stuff, lots of storylines, and some new storylines that have come out after the combine. It always happens. We're now 2.5 weeks away from the draft, which is coming up fast. Lots of stuff still to go, but and it's coming. We've got everything. We've got a bunch of stuff on the hockeybears.com with this, wrap up for the scouting combine. Lots of articles from Peter and Mark and Andrew. I'll add right afterwards. And we also got our draft profiles, over 125, I believe now. We hopefully get closer to the 130-ish.
Knocking on the door at 130 right now, just
All
one
right.
away.
There we go. So yeah, lots of stuff to look at on the website and the Substack. Lots of fun stuff coming up as well. We've got once the draft day is, we'll do our normal blow by blow. Every time when a pick gets made, we're going to have something out on it. So make sure you're following us as the draft goes on. Thanks, Mark, for coming on the show again. As we always love having you. Maybe have you another time just before the draft, and we'll do a mock and do a quick end of just before the draft mock draft and see how we're all thinking
Okay.
as we get closer. So that should be fun. But make sure checking out everything else on the website. But until our next episode, we'll see you on another episode of Prospect Corner.